Um, so today is going to be the final chapter in the series that we've been on. Next week is Servant Sunday. I hope you join us. We're going to be doing cleanup and repair and building projects for Youth First, also assembling some more meals. We've been having these meals ready and in our freezer for anyone who's going through stuff, and we've been handing them out willy-nilly, and I see some folks in this room that have been recipients of them already, and I know that you're thankful for them. Well, we're going to be putting more together next Sunday, and then the Sunday after that, we're going to be starting a new series called Here's the Church, and we're going to be talking about what it means to be a church, what it means to be part of a church, where did this whole idea of church come from, and what's the whole point of it anyway. So if you know someone who's given up on church utterly and said, I tried the church thing and it's not for me, this would be a great time to invite them to Northern Light, because we are going to be talking about what is the church at its heart and how the church through the ages has often missed the mark on that. And so you're invited to join us in 2 weeks as we start that series. But today we're going to be talking about the final chapter in the series called The Art of Yes, where we've been saying yes to different ways that God is inviting us to fuller and better life. And the way that God is inviting us to fuller and better life today is through sacrifice. Yay! Yeah, wow, I just saw all your faces light up, right? Some people have a very clear first memory of understanding what sacrifice is. Maybe it's from Sunday school and you heard an explanation about Jesus and Jesus' sacrifice. Maybe it's from a heroic story of bravery, or for some it's seeing your own single mom take that third job so that you can afford the baseball uniform you needed. Everyone has their own stories of what sacrifice means to you. And as I reflected back on all those beautiful kinds of stories and wondered to myself, when did I first understand what sacrifice is? Well, it wasn't any of those, actually. My first memory of sacrifice is from Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom. So perhaps you remember this scene. Indy and his little buddy are peeking over the rocks down on this massive chaos going on below them with this ritual happening over a lake of molten lava, and this poor schmuck held captive in a cage, and you remember what everyone's chanting? This is going to date you if you know. Kalima, Kalima, you don't have to do that now. That'd be a little creepy, actually. But everyone's chanting, and then the high priest has got this headdress on, and he does something with the guy's chest. Yep. And I'm not going to talk. So, but then they lower. This is a ritual sacrifice, right, to their deity, and they lower this poor guy in the cage into a lake of burning lava. Yeah, good times. Why haven't I showed that movie to my kids yet? I just can't. Anyway, those are all beautiful stories of sacrifice. This one is not. But from this perspective, from the Indiana Jones angle, the Temple of Doom angle on sacrifice is about victimhood, right? The person with the power is more than happy to volunteer someone else to make that sacrifice, right? Or to be the sacrifice. In stories like these, are the powerful ones ever the ones making the sacrifice? No, never. Of course not. We sacrifice for the sake of the powerful, to earn the favor of a king or a leader or a parent. And when we sacrifice for our religion, it's to earn the favor of God, to buy a place in the afterlife, our own private mansion in heaven, right? And that's a pretty typical understanding of sacrifice, actually. And so most of the time, when we turn to the story of Jesus and the themes of sacrifice found there, we bring these same categories. Jesus is sacrificed to appease God. Jesus is like the hapless guy in the Temple of Doom, right? A victim, a bargaining chip, an offering to an angry God to silence God's wrath for the world. And the way that we're told that all of this works for us is that if we believe hard enough that this proposition about Jesus' death is true, then we don't get sacrificed like Jesus did. You've heard this story before, right? Jesus died the death I should have died, right? We don't have to suffer. We don't get the same fiery pit that these poor fools found themselves in. And that's a pretty simple, straightforward vision of how all this works. There are those with power, like God, and then there are those who are victims of the ones with power, like us. And the thing that makes Jesus so great, the reason we've got this whole religion around this Jesus guy, is that he was just enough better than us, like, boop, that his victimhood at the hands of God is enough to cover us too. And that's an easy universe to live in, actually. It spares me from any necessary pain or any personal sacrifice of any kind. All the sacrificing that ever needed to happen has already been done in the life and death of this Middle Eastern peasant a long time ago in a land far away. But as with most things, if you pay much attention, Jesus doesn't let us off with simple answers like this. Jesus doesn't let us off so easily. If we're going to ascribe all this significance to the death of Jesus, and we do, I got a cross on the wall behind me, right? We think the death of Jesus is a big deal, but if we're going to say that, then we really need to make sure that the understanding we have of the cross is the understanding Jesus had of the cross. It's kind of important. And so that's why we're going to look at what Jesus had to say about sacrifice in a few different places. Jesus had a lot to say about sacrifice. In John 12:24, Jesus says, "I tell you the solemn truth, unless a kernel of wheat falls into the ground and dies, it remains by itself alone. But if it dies, it produces much grain." So here Jesus is saying that self-sacrifice is inherently connected with new life. Nothing grows unless something else dies. And so wrapped up in the idea of sacrificial death itself, there is a promise of life. Jesus also talks about sacrifice when he initiates the practice of taking communion. At the story of the Last Supper. In Mark 14, Mark 14 says about the Last Supper, while they were eating, Jesus took bread, and after giving thanks, he broke it, and he gave it to his disciples and said, "Take it, this is my body." And after taking the cup and giving thanks, he gave it to them, and they all drank from it. And he said to them, "This is my blood, the blood of the covenant that is poured out for many." So here, Jesus is pointing to his impending execution. He's saying again that there's something life-giving that comes out of sacrifice. And in this case, it's his own sacrifice, very specifically. His broken body is nourishing like bread. His spilt blood is refreshing like wine. And there are stories from the history of Israel that are tied into this image too. The bread is a reminder of the bread that God provided while God's people wandered in the wilderness. The wine is connected with this new covenant idea, a story that was 600 years old when Jesus talked about it at the Last Supper. A story that promised that God would move away from a system of rule-keeping and toward a system of changing hearts. And there's another word for that when we move away from rule-keeping and into a changed heart, and that word is life. Getting out of the rules and into living itself. So here it is again. Somehow life comes out of sacrifice. For Jesus, sacrifice isn't a consequence of what you've done wrong, or a problem to be overcome, or a power play by those in high positions. For Jesus, sacrifice is a path to life. And then there's this one other teaching about sacrifice from Jesus. It's clearly the hardest to kind of wrap our heads around. We just heard it a bit ago. I'm going to read it again in a different translation. Here's how it goes. Then Jesus called the crowd along with his disciples and said to them, "If anyone wants to become my follower, they must deny themselves, take up their cross, and follow me. For whoever wants to save their life will lose it. But whoever loses their life for my sake and for the gospel will save it." I sat with these words for a good long time this week, getting ready for today. And my first response to these words went something like this. Hey, Jesus, I can deal with it when you're talking about an abstract grain of wheat. I can handle it when you're talking about your death as bread and wine. But since when do I need a cross of my own? Right? Hey, Jesus, I want to follow you as you feed thousands. I want to follow you when you get this miraculous catch of fish. I even want to follow you on your resurrection day. I'd even follow you to your cross, unlike most of your disciples. But why do I need a cross of my own? That doesn't sound fun. That was my first reaction. Maybe it's yours too, as I read these words. But as I leaned into these words, I saw that there was more going on. I read these words and I reflected back on some of those other images. On the grain of wheat, sacrifice leads to life. I thought of the Last Supper. Sacrifice leads to life. And when I listened to these words from Jesus asking me to take up my cross, I realize that that is exactly what Jesus wants for me too. It is an inexplicable and yet constant law of reality that it is in giving that we receive. It's in giving. And the joy that they experience, right? But it happens so much beyond that too. Just think about your breath. Take a moment and pay attention to the breath that you're breathing right now. Breathing in, breathing out. If all you ever did was breathe in, you'd suffocate. Right? You'd suffocate. You'd die. We have to breathe in and allow air to do its thing, and then we breathe out. We take in the oxygen that our bodies need, and we release the carbon dioxide that other living things need. And when those two things are kept in balance, we live in harmony with our world. Pretty amazing thing, right? But what happens when we take more than we give? We just hang on to it. All you have to do is pay attention to climate news to find the answer to that question, right? The floods in the Midwest, the cyclones in southern Africa, warmer and warmer winters with crazier and crazier weather events. Hey, remember that polar vortex that made our winter so cold and ridiculous? You remember how no one used to talk about those like 5 years ago? This is like a new thing. Do you know why that's just happening now? It's called a polar vortex because it's supposed to be at the North Pole. But now it's down here because of the effects that humans have had on our atmosphere. All that carbon in our atmosphere, humanity has taken and taken and taken and taken from the earth, consuming but rarely sacrificing. And now we're experiencing the results. And it's only going to get worse unless we do something drastic and sacrificial for the sake of our earth. By the way, real quick, some people don't believe in climate change. I still love you. And you can do things that are good for the earth anyway. You don't need to have a scientific reason to care for the earth that God entrusted with us to care for. So you don't have to say nothing bad will happen. Just do good things, and we're all in it, and and everything's copacetic. So that's my statement about that. We can disagree and still be friends, and you can still do things to care for the earth that God entrusted to humanity's care. But But the fact is, it is in giving that we receive. If we care for the earth, it will care for us, right? If we care for our families, they will care for us. If we care for our bodies, they will care for us. And that is why Northern Light has embarked on this wild new adventure. And we've really taken hold of this radical vision for what it means for us to be the church that our community needs. In case you missed it, we are imagining what it would look like to create a way of life as a church that would be framed around this breathing in and out that I was talking about in equal measure. Our goal, and we can't get there right away, but the goal that we're putting out there for ourselves would be to take steps towards sending 50% of our resources outside our walls in the coming years. We've already decided that this transition is going to require some major changes, and we're in the process of figuring out exactly what that will look like. The first thing we realized is that we can't spend $4,000 a month on these four walls and be as generous as we want to with the community that we love. So last week we voted to move, and we don't know exactly where we're going yet, but we know we're moving, right? We're following that pillar of cloud I was talking about last week. Another important change is that we're going to be asking more of you. Here's what I mean by that. Here at Northern Light, sharing with our community almost never means just writing a check and sticking it in the mail. Almost never. We offer grace and hope to our community and to this world in real, hands-on, relational ways. And so we are inviting everyone who's connected with Northern Light to reflect and to pray about what you're passionate about, how you'd like to make a greater contribution to this community and this church through the ways that you serve, and to know that showing up for Sunday mornings is a great start. But I would say showing up for Sunday mornings is a great way of it's breathing in. And our church really wants to exhale God's love into this community. And so we need to find out what those other ways are that we can be more expansive in the ways we offer love and grace and hope to the people around us. And the challenge is going to be finding ways that every single one of us can say yes to breathing out more consistently, more creatively, more compassionately in this world. And I am already taking the first step in that, personally. As a key part of this process, I have proposed that my job as pastor be moved from 3/4 time to a 1/4 time position. So there will be a big shift for my family and for this church. There are going to be some gaps left behind when I reduce my role here, and it's on us to come together, to take up new roles, and to lead and to make this vision a reality. It's a real sacrifice on a personal level, and I don't say that to be a martyr of any kind. I take this sacrifice on with joy because I believe that just like Jesus, there's life on the other side. I'm willing to do it. I'm willing to sacrifice the comfort of being full-time professional clergy. I'm willing to sacrifice my pride and say that a smaller role around here will do. And I'm willing to do those sacrifices because I know that there's life in there. I know that there's hope for the community that we live in, hope for this world, hope for the church. And that hope doesn't come from clinging to what's ours with some kind of death grip. And here's how I know that. Because unless a grain of wheat falls, it won't spring forth. Unless we get our bread to be broken, the world can't be fed. Unless we take up our cross, there can be no resurrection. So just a brief word. This is the invitation that's open to all who are gathered here and all those watching online right now. I want you to seriously think about what makes you come alive. What is the thing that you can offer to this world? And then let's talk about it. And let's find a way that we can channel that through Northern Light, support that with other volunteers and people who are passionate about the same thing, and see what kind of life comes out on the other side. This is the process that we're entering into. It's more than just picking up and moving shop to another location down the road. It's changing our whole way of life so that we are, with every movement, breathing in and breathing out God's amazing grace. Because resurrection is a big deal in Christianity. Perhaps you've noticed. In most churches, we hang these empty crosses on the wall. You know why? Because Jesus didn't stay dead. Jesus rose on the third day, and we'll celebrate that together on Easter morning in just a few weeks. And we know that the church is a resurrection community, right? The church kind of started that first day when the tomb was empty. And since then, we've been offering this new life to the world in every place the church is found. But you can't get to Easter Sunday without going through Good Friday. You can't experience resurrection without sacrifice. And just as much as the church is to be a resurrection community, the church needs to be a sacrificial community too, in equal measure, right? Breathing in and breathing out, giving and receiving. And I think many of the problems that people have had with their experience of church is they experience a church that's only ever breathing in. And people are looking for something real that's breathing in and breathing out. I was at a continuing education event with some pastor friends. I know it sounds super fun. And we were talking about church finances. Again, could this get any more fun? And we were talking about different churches and their approaches to encourage people to be generous. And one of my pastor friends said, you know those millennials. Anytime a sentence starts that way, you know it's not going to go well, right? You can't use words like sacrifice or generosity. Those words won't get you anywhere. And in some ways, I think that pastor friend of mine was right. In past generations, people would be generous or make sacrifices because it's just what you do, right? It's just the right thing to do. And so if you were running kind of your run-of-the-mill standard name brand organization and you wanted people to contribute more, you just appeal to their better angels, just appeal to their sense of generosity and sacrifice, because we all know that's something that people do. And I believe that this current generation has not given up on sacrifice. They've given up on institutions that don't give them life on the other side. And why would you ever sacrifice if there isn't life on the other side? Millennials in the room, correct me if I'm wrong, but are you scared of the word sacrifice if it's for something that you believe in? No. Something that fills your soul, something that is a force for redemption in the world. Are you scared of sacrificing for something like that? No. The problem isn't that we ask people to sacrifice. The problem is that we ask them to sacrifice for something that's too small. We need a big vision of what God is up to in the world, a bigger vision than any church or denomination or country or religion can offer. A vision bigger than that's so big that it makes sense of this messy, often nasty world we live in. We need a vision that's so big we'll shift our families and our careers and our whole lives around it. That's why we aren't just asking you to sacrifice for this church. Because there are a million churches, and we're no better or worse than any of them. We're asking you to sacrifice as the pathway to resurrection. And we want to provide as many opportunities to do that within our walls and as many gateways for that sacrifice to make its way into the world as we can. We're asking that you give so that your hands are open and outstretched and ready to receive. We'll never experience resurrection if we aren't willing to die first. I'm willing to die to my old way of doing church. Are you? I'm willing to die to a culture of receiving without giving. Are you? How about let's go with a yes? Yes. There it is. I'm willing to die to sacrificing for an institution. Are you? Yes. Let's continue to commit ourselves to saying yes to sacrifice. Sacrifice for one another, sacrifice for the good of this world, sacrifice out of our love for God. And let's discover together the resurrection life that is on the other side when we say yes and take up our cross and sacrifice. Pray with me. God, we thank you that your promise of life is not small or limited to one small moment on the earth. That when Jesus conquers death at that first Easter, it isn't the aberration, it isn't the anomaly, it's the sign of the way it is and always will be. That you are working to bring new life, eternal life, into this world through each one of us. We ask that you would help us to have a posture of openness to the possibility of sacrifice, of giving more than we thought we could, not to keep an institution afloat, but so that our arms are open to the life that will come through it. Amen.